This is a feedback video for the natural selection and speciation summative. The first section of this assessment is justifying a claim with evidence. This graph shows the phenotype frequency of badgers over generations. The graph that you received in your version may be different from this. However, this feedback video will be general enough for you to understand how I scored your assessment. The claim gives a scenario and then a graph as well. These tie directly into one another. The claim asks you, can you conclude the natural selection has taken place? No matter what version you got, the answer is yes. I did not put any points on this specific yes or no question, but rather I looked at your evidence. And your evidence needs to include specific numbers from the graph. Okay? The question asks, be specific with numerical data. That is what the evidence section is. The reasoning asks you, to provide an explanation, and this is the stories that we did. So you needed to include all four parts of the natural selection process, and you see in the feedback that you all will receive. There had to be discussion about overpopulation, random mutations or variation, a struggle to exist, and survival of the fittest or adaptation. That all had to be present in your story. I was expecting a pretty lengthy response here. Beyond the obvious, here you're given a scenario that something changed. In this example, this version, the group of badgers became nocturnal, and then it tells you what type of reproductive it asks you what type of reproductive isolation is occurring. Again, it'll be different in your version, but you had to choose the correct choice. In this case, temporal or time, because these badgers were nocturnal. They weren't reproducing or even awake at the same time. The key word is time. Another beyond the obvious question, describe how the speciation would occur in this new badger population in as much detail as you can. Be sure to explain how you know it is the specific type of isolation selected above. This was not a part of your points, this specific choice. However, I did look at this beyond the obvious answer right here. So this is where you would receive points. Because it is beyond the obvious, it is a 4-point question. So I was looking for an explanation. Defend your reasoning here. An additional beyond the obvious question, how would you verify that the two badger populations are in fact separate species? Here there were two acceptable answers. One is that they would be unable to reproduce and have fertile offspring. The other is that their DNA would have significant differences. That is, the base sequence, the A's, T's, C's, and G's, will be different between those two species. I was looking for at least one of those. Saying something like, well, they look different is not enough, because if you think about dogs, they're all part of the same species, but they look dramatically different from one another. That's the first section. That's graded out of 4. Types of selection here, we have a CER, again, justifying a claim with evidence, all right? So here we go with part 2. Again, your graph will look a little different, maybe depending on what version you got. But here again, we set it up the same way with a scenario and a graph representing the data. Here the question asks you, what type of selection? We had 3 different types of selection that we discussed in this unit: stabilizing selection, directional selection, and disruptive. We can talk about what happened here. In this case, generation 1, we see this curve here, this blue generation, but look what happens in generation 50. We have a disruptive type of selection that's affecting these giraffes and their neck length. Evidence had to tie directly into the graph. Here I was okay if you discussed trends in your graph. What did you notice? I was a little softer on using numbers, but you had to include a change in the distribution or a change in frequency for your evidence. Reasoning, look at the word here, why. Why this type of selection is occurring. So if you selected the correct choice, you were in great shape because you're able to give some evidence and some reasoning to support it. But if you didn't select the right choice, that really damages your score on this rubric, unfortunately. So I really was looking for continuity throughout this. Explain why this type of selection is occurring. Why is, in this version, disruptive selection occurring? What is causing the change in neck sizes? You had to put it in context of the story of the giraffes. So what was happening to the giraffes? Why, in this case, were short necks and long necks, but not medium necks favored? Maybe you'll say something, well, vegetation changed and there was only really short trees and really long trees. I was looking for some story, not a specific story, but something that would tie directly into your graph. So that's for this reasoning. Finally, beyond the obvious. Now in 2015, they give you a new scenario. There was a fire causing all the types of trees to fall to the ground, leading ultimately to short vegetation or smaller trees. You had to propose two outcomes. Two. A lot of people said extinction. That's great. And a lot of people talked about adaptation. So trending back to a shorter neck size over multiple generations, because those would be most fit to survive. So this was a CER. We can see a claim. So this will be points. Evidence, 2 points. Reasoning, 3 points. Beyond the obvious, 4 points. So you'll see 2 scores in your assessment. It might be weighted down to 1, depending on what the department agrees on, but hopefully that serves you well as feedback. In addition to this written feedback that you all will have access to, and this feedback is specific to your assessment. So view this video and view the feedback that you receive. And as always, you can ask me any questions related to grading. I hope that was informative for you. Have a great day.